We're going to devote our energies to sports and gardening, all the cultural pursuits as far as they're concerned. In fact, we're going to put the goons to sleep. Meanwhile, we dig.
Greetings and welcome to the Anadromist. This is Byrne Power, your Anadromist, the person who goes and swims the opposite way upstream. And today's video is going to be a little different. I want to talk about something that I've noticed on different channels, fortunately not so much on my own, but some people say, Byrne, your channel should have lots more viewers. Well, one thing I know that comes with lots more viewers is lots more headaches. Lots more people who don't really understand what you say. Lots more people trying to make political or theological points. Lots more people not so much in entering into a conversation as they are simply roaming around the internet seeking to, have someone say, I'm here. Fortunately, the people I have in my 1,000+ subscribers on this channel and whoever else is dropping in, I would say so far I've been very fortunate in the kinds of people I have. There's been very little, skirmishes in the comment section, very few big misunderstandings. There will always be people who don't really understand something crucial that I'm trying to say, but that's life. But what I want to talk about is, if my channel does get bigger, I will have more people who tend to show up when more people discover something. And these are the people who will essentially, like I say, they'll want to make a point at the expense of whatever a person might be saying. Now, I've noticed on different channels, Paul Vanderklay, I consider him a friend. He has a channel, and on his channel, he was recently saying that he gets people who don't understand if he brings certain kinds of speaker or does certain kind of interviews or will look at certain kind of videos and do commentary on them. And people, since he is a Christian, a Protestant Christian, he will get comments about things like, why did you bring this guy Vervaeke and he was talking about Buddhism? What's up with that? Or people who, well-meaning people, probably recent converts from Orthodoxy with a big O, saying things like, why aren't you Orthodox yet? Like, it's obvious everyone's going to become big O Orthodox. Or you can go to another channel like Tim Pool's channel. Tim Pool is an independent journalist, and he was there at Occupy Wall Street. And then he saw the change in Occupy Wall Street between protesting the very rich who were getting, and the big banks who were getting all these bailouts from the government, leaving the average person to kind of wallow in the 2008 financial crisis. And on the other hand, he saw how the woke, what we would now call the woke people, moved in with their intersectional politics and took over the movement, which then kind of ended the movement eventually. So, because he pointed that out, he then started getting people coming to his channel who assumed he was far more right-wing than he usually actually would say he is. He would say he's kind of left, libertarian, blah, blah, blah. But he will say something and suddenly there'll be a dog pile on him and people will be saying, for instance, during the elections, Tim may have voted for Trump, but he didn't sit there and say, yes, this has to have been, whatever, in the elections. He didn't do that. So there were people in the comment section, you could read this, and it's always this very barbed tinge, people saying like, well, do you see it now? What's wrong with you? Okay, maybe now you're going to understand this reaction. To me, it's the thing that I react to is when people assume that you think like them. Now, I hope most of you understand there isn't much of a chance in hell that you think like me. For one thing, you haven't had my experiences, and even though we may agree on religious things to some degree, or political things, whatever I think, because I don't put my politics out, I really am a firm believer of holding your cards close to the vest and playing them only when you need to. I don't come on and tell you political ideas. I mean, you can guess certain things, but even then, I mean, I've had this in my Christian experience as well. People will assume I'm saying one thing. And why do people assume? They assume because they don't want to challenge what they think, because that's too difficult. So it's better to assume that someone who talks a little bit like you thinks like you, like a checklist. And that's rarely true. Now, there are people who will all have the same idea about something. I mean, the same thing happens on the left. And I'm not calling myself a person of the right or the left. One person I've followed for years is Timothy Garton-Ash on The Guardian. Yeah, it's a left-wing paper. He's always struck me as a reasonable person. In his comments, he often thinks about, I don't agree with, many things he says. But nevertheless, I find him worth listening to. Then you read the comments, and if he makes any sentence, anything, I mean, the comments are just filled with endless one-upsmanship, endless, trolling, endless, and you look at this and you say, like, what is going on? Well, what is going on is what I have often said in other places is going on. We live in a world of propaganda. And as such, our propaganda tends to make us think we know exactly who's to blame. We know exactly what's going on. No one does. Which is why if I do get any hints of that, I tend to say, right. It's just like, if you're that intelligent, why haven't you solved the problems of the world? It's the same with conspiracy theories. Really? It's super secret, but you know it? I don't think so. But we all know. No, we don't. Life is complicated. But I thought I would talk about the effect of propaganda upon people. And there is an effect upon all of us. We are all infected by propaganda. And as I have said before in my other discussions on propaganda, propaganda is not the lies they tell versus the truth we know. Propaganda is an entire environment, and people tend to live within those environments and to be very suspicious of anything coming from outside that environment. Some people use the word tribalistic. I tend to use the word propagandistic because tribalistic is sort of an idea that goes back into primitive time. And so people are trying to make some sort of evolutionary statement, I suppose, about, how we're all connected to our various tribes. Yeah, maybe. But here's what I do know. We're not living in those times anymore. We are living in a very high-tech world. And one of the rules of this world is the more information you get, the more propaganda you get. So I just want to say that we are all infected by propaganda. And that is especially the propaganda we agree with. But I've discussed this at length in other videos. So that's not really what I want to talk about. I want to talk about one little aspect. How can you know if you're propagandized? Well, do you watch mass media? Do you watch all sorts of stuff? Do you try to figure out what everyone's saying? Yeah, you're probably propagandized. But here's the real test. And one of the ways that people demonstrate how propagandized they are is through what I've called the knee-jerk reaction, the propaganda knee-jerk. It's almost a dance. And that is that people listen when they've discovered Jordan Peterson, for instance, and they would hear him saying things they liked. And then suddenly he would say something they didn't quite like. What was it? Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray were having a conversation earlier this year where they were giving their view of what happened with the last election and January 6th and all of that. And people lost their minds. I mean, it would be funny if it wasn't so tragic that people do not understand how people actually have conversations, that everybody doesn't see the same thing, that even people who are supposedly on your side don't see what you see. I mean, I wonder how these people even get along in life, because as soon as someone says the opposite, they move. I used to say things like this back when I was dealing with the musical tribes that were developing in the 1980s. It was like people were saying things like, yeah, I really like the Sex Pistols. And someone else go like, yeah, but I really like the Clash. And they'll go like, oh, okay. That would be the end of the discussion. And yeah, they are different, but it's this like, yeah, well, you both like punk rock, so talk, communicate. Emo Phillips has a great joke about a guy who wants to jump over the Golden Gate Bridge, jump off of it, and land in the water and kill himself.
We should all learn to love each other. Once I was in San Francisco, walking along the Golden Gate Bridge, and I saw this guy on the bridge about to jump. I thought I'd try to stall him, detain him, long enough for me to put the film in. I said, don't jump, and he turns. You've heard of the elephant man. He had the head like the head of a horse. And my heart went out to him. I said, why the long face? He said, all my life people have called me cruel names like Flicka, or Trigger, Silver, Chess Piece. I said, well, don't worry about it, Ed. It can't be that bad. He said, oh yeah? How would you like to go through your whole life as a freak? I said, well. He said, well, you're a bad example. But you know what I mean. I said, come on. You're not the only person in this world saddled with a few problems. Don't be mule-headed. Stop horsing around and get down from there, you silly ninny. He said, why go on? In 100 years, the planet will be uninhabitable. In 10 million years, the sun will burn out. In 100 billion years, all matter will disintegrate from the universe. I said, perhaps, but in the meantime, in between time, ain't we got fun? Besides, you're forgetting about God. He said, how do you know there's a God? I said, of course there's a God. Do you think billions of years ago, a bunch of molecules floating around at random without rhyme or reason could someday have had the sense of humor to make you look like that? He said, I used to believe in God. I said, that's good. Were you a Christian or a Jew? He said, a Christian. I said, me too. Protestant or Catholic? He said, Protestant. I said, me too. What franchise? He says, Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Baptist or Southern Baptist? He says, Northern Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Baptist or Northern Liberal Baptist? He says, Northern Conservative Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist or Northern Conservative Reform Baptist? He says, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region, or Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Eastern region? He says, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region. I said, me too. Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region, Council of 1879, or Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region, Council of 1912. He says, Northern Conservative Fundamentalist Baptist, Great Lakes region, Council of 1912. I said, die, heretic! And I pushed him over.
It shows the insanity, and again, a very good illustration of the propagandized mind. The person who thinks only through the lens of their specific denomination is the truth to be found. Which I don't find anything remotely like that in Christ's words or in Paul's. They both seem to realize there are multiple visions of things, and sometimes you have to let the imperfect slide, particularly what you consider to be imperfect. So, you know what a knee-jerk is. Knee-jerk is you go to the doctor, they want to test your reflexes, so they put your knee so it kind of hangs over a bench, and then they come with a little rubber hammer, and they hit just a certain spot right on your knee where there's a bit of cartilage, and boom, your knee, if you're in good shape, your knee goes. And it just, you can't stop it. And they look at that, and the doctors are always like, that's a good thing. So what's important, though, is that when your knee jerks physically, that's a good thing. But emotionally, politically, theologically, when your knee jerks, that's a terrible thing. What do I mean? It means you don't even have a governor to prevent an overreaction. You just simply hear a word and react. And it's often a word. Sometimes it'll just be someone's name, like Trump or Macron or Putin or Merkel or Obama or Clinton. Or you'll hear a concept, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian, feminism, Muslim, Christian, or God, the devil, or a company name. You hear McDonald's and you're like, whoa. You hear Apple and you're like, oh. These sorts of things. Starbucks, oh my God. We hear these words and people just have some sort of immediate reaction. Liberal, equality, free speech. I saw some meme recently where the guy says, it's really not free speech. It's really freeze peach. Ooh, what a clever rogue this guy was for, figuring out he could make a pun out of it. As if that somehow solved the problem. Because we really don't want freeze peaches. And I'm not saying I like all of this stuff or anything. You see, that's the whole point. The fact that I mention it says absolutely nothing about what I really think about it. Most of you have no clue on earth about what I think about Muslims because I've never talked about it, and it's probably not a subject that's necessarily going to ever come up, and quite frankly, you don't have to write anything in the comments about it because you're not going to get me to applaud because you're suddenly saying, yeah, but what about the fact that, it's just like, I don't care. That's not the subject of discussion. A good discussion tends to stay on subject. A bad discussion wanders from reaction point to reaction point. And that's what people often do. They just hear something and they react. And that's bad news. That's bad news for you trying to learn anything. I would say this. The person whose life is simply made out of reactions is probably living in the poorest of all possible conditions because they're not open to anything. And I'm not saying you have to be so open-minded your brains fall out or anything like that. What I am saying, though, is you have to learn to listen to what a person is saying. What's interesting is that these people who have reacted to Paul Vanderklay, that he's too intellectual, or he is what is it? John Vervaeke was mentioning Buddhism. It's just like, guys, did you not hear anything else Paul was saying? In people who preach, it's like they're a certain kind of Christian who always wants to hear, and Jesus died for your sins at the end of every sentence. That is to say, today we're going to talk about Genesis chapter 6, and we're going to talk about the Nephilim and what were they and such, and Jesus died for your sins. And a friend of mine who is a preacher once said, you can't preach on the book of Revelations when you're talking about Genesis. I mean, there are times you can, but generally there are different times to talk about different things. And the person who overreacts, and we all do, we all have things that tick us off. There have been a time when if someone said New Age stuff or yoga or, that kind of thing, I'd just be like, ugh, my back would straighten out. It doesn't so much anymore because I realize we are in one really complex, syncretistic age, and if I just lose sleep over every person who says the wrong thing, I might be too awake, if you know what I'm saying. That's the thing about being woke. If you don't get any sleep, you go crazy. You gotta sleep sometimes. You gotta give it a rest. You can't run around looking for the people saying the perfect thing, and maybe, I'm sure someday I'm going to say something that you go like, oh, Byrne, what did you mean by that? Can I suggest an answer to the question? Listen to the rest of what I'm saying. Put it in context. Don't simply jump off of one phrase. Part of the reason I'm making this video is because I'm preparing for the future. I'm assuming the channel will grow, and I'm assuming I will get some of these people landing on the channel, particularly if anything happens where a larger channel focuses on what I do. It's just like, okay, maybe that would be good financially for some reason, because I'm not getting anything from YouTube for doing that, but in fact, there's a lot of reason to wonder when you grow what you lose as well. And so essentially, if I get people who are saying, what about this now, Byrne? Hey, things aren't like you said in How We Got Here number 7 anymore because of X. I often get this with people who were listening to those Yuri Bezmenov videos and they want to answer everything with, just like Yuri Bezmenov said. And I'm sitting there going like, do you realize I've read all 3 volumes of Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago? That's like close to 2,000 pages. And plus I've read the rest of his work. Do you realize I didn't wake up this morning thinking about Russia and communism? Do you have any idea about this? Sorry for getting a little bit, just like blowing up. But the truth is, people react. And they often have reasons for reacting. One reason for reacting, I remember this used to happen in New York City. New York City is where I really started studying horror film imagery and stories, and to wonder what we were saying to ourselves in this. But I would meet occasionally very good Christian friends, and they were concerned for me. And they would say, Byrne, I hope you're not under any sort of demonic influence from these things. And I would want to just say, oh my God, what are you saying? But instead, what I would do is I would speak their language and I would say like, no, I think God has called me to study these things, which is what I do feel. But I also know that, on one level, sometimes you need someone who will see things the rest of us don't see. But the truth is, tons of people watch horror films. Someone needs to understand it. As someone once said, every weekend there are people screaming in movie theaters. Does this not matter to you? Is it just a funny thing that people are dying in these movies, is that just something we can ignore? I don't think so, which is precisely why I study these things. And so I'm never impressed by people who tell me, yeah, I don't watch horror films. It's just like, oh, okay, were you hoping to impress me with this knowledge? Because it doesn't impress me. It would impress me more is if you said, these things give me troubles, but I'm glad you're working on it. That'll help me to understand it. That would impress me. But again, people react. I mean, in the 80s, there was a lot of talk about demonic possession and satanic panic and all the rest of it, and I've never been one who overreacts. I tend to weigh. Part of this is the Rookmaaker influence. And the interesting thing about Rookmaaker, I'm going to put up a video pretty soon. I've been kind of building up to this one, where Rookmaaker talks about nudity in art and, the Christian response. Now, he's got a room full of theologians from the Westminster Seminary there, and they're men and women, and, this really ticks them off. But Rookmaaker at first handles it very politely and tries to explain it. And then he says, at a certain point, he just says, there's a problem, something really deeply wrong in America, where you do not understand the nature of what it means to be human. And, he just goes off on it. It's wonderful. And so I learned that from him. Plus, I spent 16 years in New York City. So when it comes to verbal sparring, no, I don't have to back down. I can. I often do, simply because I recognize that the person I'll be talking to is going to be mortified to enter into that sort of combat with me, verbal sparring. But I don't have to. I can, it's just like, I'm one of these people. For years, people would walk up to me and say things like, you should smile more. You get these random people. Am I the only one who's ever had this? These random people who say, you really should smile more. And I always had, sitting in my pocket, the perfect response to that. But I knew that if I pulled it out, I would devastate them. But the perfect response was, my mother just died. For many years, that was not true. And, but it's like, you don't know what's going on inside of someone. You can't walk up to someone who's in pain inside and say, really, you should smile more. You would look much better if you smiled. It takes, fewer muscles to smile than it takes to frown. Eventually my mother did die, but I never did use that excuse. And fortunately, I guess I've gotten to the point where people are a little intimidated to come up to me and say, Byrne, you should smile more. Because, again, that sort of comment leaves me, shall we say, chilly. Well, we all have knee-jerk reactions. You have to face that. You should really think, where are mine? What is it if someone says, Paul says, there's a guy, Sam, I've never talked to him. He actually contacted me once, Sam, if you're watching, and said, I'd like to talk to you sometime. And he wanted to ask me about my Jesus People experiences, to which I wrote him back saying, watch the autobiographical Q&A video. And, so we're not reinventing the wheel here, which is a good, if you want to interview me, don't just ask the same questions over and over. It's not interesting for everybody. So, but, I've heard he's not Trinitarian, to which my response then is, so, there isn't anybody I wouldn't talk to, because everyone, as I see it, is made in God's image. Therefore, they could be a Satanist, they could be a terrorist, they could be anything, and I will talk to them. I don't have to agree at all. But the truth is, all people share certain things in common. And because we share things in common, there are ways to talk. For instance, one of the reasons, G.K. Chesterton pointed this out, one of the reasons we often will make a comment about the weather first is because the weather is something we all have in common. So we had a lot of thunder this morning here in Tbilisi. That's something to make a light comment. Some people say, well, I don't like, light conversation. Well, that's only a little hors d'oeuvre. You move on. You need to learn how to have conversations would be my reply to that. You need to move on. You start with a little introduction. You don't start off saying, I was prepared to give up everything in my life this morning because I saw there was no meaning. Now, that would be a pretty bad way to begin a conversation. And what would anyone have to say to that? I've never thought that even, because I think life is fascinating. And it always is. Even at times when it is just so difficult and my head explodes, I still know life is fascinating and worth it. And I enjoy the fact that you are all there. And let's turn this on. If you get a lot of images that you've been watching for a while, that's because I forgot to turn the camera on for part 2. So such is life. Hopefully you can have heard my words and will have found a way to incorporate something of what I'm saying. I mean, some really nice visual points with my fingers, but hey, that's life. And again, it's like, there's no point in being a perfectionist. It's better that I just get this out and not do this over and over. This is the second time I've done this. I started this the other day and then put my computer that had my notes on it in front of my audio recording device. And I said, no, let's try it again. But, so basically we'll end it this way. Thank you for being here. Thank you for those. You may notice I enjoy entering into conversations. If someone just writes a note and says, that was great, the most you're going to get from me is like a little like on it. Because it's like, that's not much of a reply. If someone makes an observation that's interesting, they might get a heart. If someone asks a serious question, I try to answer in some manner seriously. But and I've had this a few times where people just start, you can tell they've got their hobby horse they're riding. And the hobby horse, of course, doesn't really go anywhere. And they're on it. And, there are people who, there's some people it's just like, okay, fine, you've read all these books. Get outside, go look at some things, and let's talk when you come back in. There are other people, and I will still answer them, but at a certain point, especially if a person wants to have one of these kind of conversations that's, this is the high-class version of Propagandized. If they want to have one of these conversations where we go into, but Heidegger said this, and then expect me to respond to that, especially if you're going to keep digging and digging and digging it. It's just like, sorry, you don't know me well enough to dig this into that. And I'm going to, at a certain point, say, I'm done. And, I'll be polite about it. But, I can't claim to be perfect. I don't claim to be perfect. Nor do I put my political opinions on my sleeve. So you can be pro or anti anything, and you get a fair shot. And if you come along with some sort of remark that seems to rope me into things I have never said, I will let you know. And if you're really one of those people, and like I said, I don't think I have many of them now, but if I do get more of those people who simply want to make their point and just kind of like, touche, I win. Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm simply going to say, go watch the video on the propaganda knee-jerk. Because that's all there is to say is this. It's just like, sorry, I just don't react to it. Okay, so I've been blabbing for a while. Yes, you need to subscribe if you haven't. Yes, a like, I don't know, help somebody. The views are helpful. If you think there's something here worth sharing, share that. Thanks a lot for all of the help in getting to my goal on GoFundMe. I'm going to make a little video before the end of the month, basically wrapping it all up, because basically it's done. Although it's still up there, and if a person hasn't given, they can go to that and give. And by the way, if you're one of those people who has given through PayPal or through GoFundMe more than $50, and you want to get some of the audio extras and you never have, let me know and I'll send them to you. And by the way, just to tempt you, on my Georgian Crossroads channel, I'm starting a new thing where if same thing as here and completely separate from this, and your gifts here will not count for this, but if you give the $10 a month or $50 in one lump over at that channel, then what you will get is you will get my subscription service for Georgian music, and you will get lots of Georgian music. I have tons of files, and no one knows how to find this stuff at all. But I have it, and I'm going to expose people to the world of Georgian music. But that's over on Georgian Crossroads. Well, this is Byrne, the Anadromist, saying swim against that stream. And that especially includes propaganda. Don't indulge in propaganda. And learn where you have been, because you certainly have been, and propagandized, and it's in your mind. You know, the best way for us to continue any discussion is to start with the fact that I've got stuff in my mind that's like poison darts, and it's working its way in. Will you forgive me and help me to pull a few of these little darts out, you know? Okay. Take care.
A people without history is not redeemed from time. For history is a pattern of timeless moments.